Hello gamers, spectators, and all-around lovers of this art. My name is Harrison Hutchin, with me is Dylan Gibbons, and welcome back to another episode of Game Dissection. Today we'll be analyzing the stealth game Gunpoint. Before we dive right into this title, I'd like to give my 2 cents on the stealth game genre as a whole. With games like Thief, Sly Cooper, and Splinter Cell, stealth games have always been a big part of my gaming experience. Sneaking around an open map, setting traps, and trying to avoid detection is always an exciting challenge. The open-ended nature of stealth games invites and leaves room for one's own creativity to really shine through and develop through each unique experience that this genre allows for. In my opinion, it gives some of the most realistic, though sometimes meticulous, gameplay that a player can ask for. And this factor allows for the replaying of levels again and again to find new and interesting ways to solve the problems presented. Stealth games do much more than give the player a challenging experience. They provide creatively crafted scenarios that can provoke serious thought in how each problem can be solved. It teaches the player patience, an important feature and lesson that many times can be taken for granted by game designers who are looking to just craft the next Final Fantasy, God of War, or Killzone franchise. Don't get me wrong, I love a beautifully rendered cinematic, but when those cutscenes are over, what you're left with is the gameplay and the mechanics, and that's where stealth games really excel.
Nice work, 47.
Maybe you want to go in loud and messy, or maybe you want to see if you can get through the level without anyone being remotely aware of your presence. No matter how you play, the stealth and stealth action genres have always been there to provide new and thought-provoking experiences. As of lately, however, with the exception of Metal Gear Solid 4 several years ago, stealth games seem to have generated a very mixed reaction amongst the gaming community. It seems hard for stealth games to come to a good middle ground where the fans of the classics feel challenged, but while people new to the genre can jump in and enjoy the game without frustration. In many ways, it's a double-edged sword. Either the game in question is too easy and dumbed down for hardcore gamers, or overly complicated and too difficult for new players to enjoy and adapt to. It's a back and forth that follows the genre around like bad BO, and developers are having a tough time finding the right deodorant to mask the stench. And that's where Gunpoint comes in, a game I find makes a valiant effort in reimagining stealth. It's both engaging and difficult, while also being easy to learn, and more than anything, it's fun. Gunpoint is a 2D stealth platformer created by Suspicious Software that utilizes a dark palette and a jazzy soundtrack to set the stage for a noir-styled stealth adventure. You play as Richard Conway, a to-the-point professional spy caught up in a game of betrayal and corporate espionage. Okay, so the story isn't necessarily original, but where this game shines is how it takes the classic espionage theme and adds mechanics that allow the player to handle encounters in a variety of unique ways. The first mechanic immediately introduced to the player comes in the form of the Bullfrog Hyper Trousers. These powerful pantaloons give the player the ability to leap up, over, and sometimes straight through the buildings that they are tasked with infiltrating. They allow for quick movement around the level, and with some clever timing, allow the player to swiftly set their plans in motion. As the game progresses, you can delegate skill points to your bouncy britches to allow yourself to jump higher, farther, and stronger, helping you close the gaps between you and your target quicker and more efficiently. This mechanic, though fairly simple in nature, allows for a whole new level of play. You can quickly move to a vantage point, slip swiftly through an opening, or pounce on an unsuspecting guard without giving them a second to react. Despite the obvious advantage these super pants give you, the game has many ways of encouraging you to look before you leap. This makes it much more challenging because once you jump, there is no turning back. If you mistime your jump by a couple of seconds, you could get gunned down by one of the game's sharpshooting guards. If you don't plan your jumps correctly, you could set off an alarm and alert the whole building to your presence. But if you plan your moves and execute them with dexterity, these dynamic dungarees can give you a big advantage over your vertically impaired adversaries. The next mechanic, that gets introduced a few levels into the game, is the crosslink. The crosslink allows the player to rewire the building they are infiltrating in order to distract, trap, or incapacitate guards, as well as help the player access areas that were otherwise inaccessible. By pressing the Alt key, the player is given an alternate perspective of the level, showing which devices the player can mess with. Initially, the player can only make changes to devices highlighted in red, allowing the player to experiment with the concept and understand how it can be used to achieve their goals. Later in the game, the player is introduced to the concept of multiple circuits, forcing the player to come up with interesting ways to navigate the level in order to gain access to circuits that were initially unavailable. The ability to rewire the building opens up the game for strategic planning, and allows the player to take a variety of different paths to their objective. You can take the non-violent approach and use your rewiring abilities to simply distract a guard and/or trap them where they can't reach you. Or you can create lethal and non-lethal traps that incapacitate your foes, such as a faulty power outlet or a surprise trapdoor that sends them plummeting. This ability creates an excellent level of satisfaction when a plan really comes together. Creating successful traps and distractions really drives home the point that you are a clever and professional spy, using everything at your disposal to get where you need to be. The open-ended nature of levels, as well as the hacking abilities, brings back fond memories of the Deus Ex games, and even the first BioShock game to some extent. Being able to hack devices such as doors and gun turrets in order to gain the upper hand has always been extremely satisfying. The main difference between Gunpoint and Deus Ex, though, is that Gunpoint focuses mainly on planning and strategy. They don't allow you to quickly change tactics and go Rambo on the guards. Instead, they allow you to see everything in the level right off the bat, and allow you to experiment with different approaches. Your plan can go off track, but it's far less likely because there are significantly less rogue elements to trip you up. It's an interesting idea, to say the least, that they allowed the player to see exactly what they're getting into beforehand, and not relying on shock value in an engagement to add difficulty. This may seem like it's making the game too easy for the player, but it gets balanced out with a slew of increasingly difficult enemies that shoot first and ask questions later. On second thought, they probably don't even ask questions, seeing as how they follow the same basic formula for stealth game enemies. They pace back and forth, are very easily distracted, and will conveniently stand with their back to you just when you need them to. This is one of the areas where Gunpoint really doesn't try to make waves. Consistent with the trope, the guards are dim-witted and easy to outmaneuver. Their only real advantage is their ability to shoot you dead the minute you enter their field of vision, sometimes even from extreme distances. As Zachary Brixson of Haywire magazine points out in his article, "It Was Nothing," link in the description, this is a mechanic that remains constant in stealth games. Enemies of the genre typically pass off incredibly suspicious events as just the wind or perhaps a rodent. Gunpoint is no real exception when it comes to the effectiveness of security forces, but like Brixson points out in his article, realism is futile. The stealth genre needs dumb AI to be remotely playable. If any game tried to imitate the awareness of the average human, let alone well-trained security personnel, the game would become next to impossible to play. Either the AI clearly conveys its limits and creates playability, or it frustrates the player in ambiguity. I'm not necessarily saying that this is a fault of Gunpoint, but rather it isn't really trying anything new in that particular area. It could of course ramp up the AI awareness as levels progress, and it does that to some extent, but not to a degree that really adds an extra element of depth to your play. I suppose one difference in AI I can point out, however, that I think works out pretty well for Gunpoint, is that the guards don't just go about their business after they finish investigating something suspicious. You have one chance to catch a guard unaware, and if you fail, the guard picks up the pace of their patrol, and you have to become quicker in order to slip by them. Planning and strategy is key. I have to say, Gunpoint's main strength comes from its puzzle-solving aspects. You have to stop and think about your movements and actions. Your character is limited in combat proficiency, and his only advantage is his ability to deceive, distract, and slip past enemies. It would be folly to do things from a guns blazing perspective. You can unlock a gun in the game, eventually, but one thing about the mechanic that really surprised and intrigued me was how the developer decided to handle its usage. The gun is an absolute last resort tool to create a limited window of escape. This can be done in two ways, each with their own interesting advantages and disadvantages. You can use it to prevent being shot by a guard, staying true to the game's namesake and holding them at gunpoint until you can find an opening. This allows you to get yourself out of a tight jam that perhaps you couldn't predict. Taking hostages as opposed to incapacitation in itself is an interesting mechanic. You can also choose to shoot the guard. This one seems to carry the most disadvantages and really forces you to take a hard look at your options before going through with it. If you choose to shoot the guard, you have 30 seconds until backup arrives and blocks the level's only exit. You may choose to take this risky path because you feel that this guard is all that stands in the way of victory, and you feel that further enemy interference will be slim to none. The developer takes special measures to show that the gun is not a toy. Using it brings harsh consequences, and it's only to be used as a last resort. This, in my mind at least, is an amazing way of keeping you true to your character. Richard Conway may be a criminal, but he's not a murderer. Death and destruction are not his goals. He just wants to get paid for a job well done. This attitude is put forward in the game's story, depicted mainly through chat conversations on a PDA. You are briefed on missions, as well as background information on the game's main conflict. You are provided a few dialogue options in these segments, allowing you to perpetuate the Richard Conway you feel best suits you and your style of gameplay. They don't really have an effect on the story, however, except for in the few instances where you can choose to divulge sensitive information to certain key players, or keep it to yourself. While some critics have mostly positive things to say about the game's story, I unfortunately found these electronic interactions a little mundane, even frustrating, similar to talking to the owl in the Ocarina of Time. I found that I didn't really care about the conflict being presented. or the murder mystery that I was supposed to be helping solve. The story really took a backseat to the gameplay. It could very well be that I was just excited to keep playing the game, but after analyzing the game, I think that's just me giving a game I enjoy the benefit of the doubt. Perhaps my Richard Conway was a spy for the thrill and the payday, not really concerned with the big picture. Seeing how the developer included dialogue options following that vein, as well as a skip button for story interactions, I suspect they foresaw players like me. The story is also quite short and can be completed in a couple of hours, leaving me wanting more. Luckily, there's a map editor included in the game as well as Steam Workshop support. This allows for loads of replay value. Overall, Gunpoint really scratches my stealth game itch. It allows for strategy, cleverness, and ultimate feelings of badassery when a plan comes together. Plus, you can unlock an ability to power kick through locked doors, which is really bitchin'. What I'm trying to say is that Gunpoint does a lot of things right, and it is a reimagining of stealth that I never knew I wanted until I had it. I feel it provides the player with a lot of things that make stealth games fun, without making it either so repetitive or so difficult that you don't even want to finish the game. If you want an interesting read about stealth games and the perspectives of two different sides of the genre, I suggest you read Wesley Yin-Pool's article on Eurogamer, link in the description. In the article, he talks with Jordan Amaro, a designer for the upcoming Metal Gear Solid 5, and Mike Bithell, an independent developer working on a classic Metal Gear throwback titled Volume. Both discuss their views on stealth as a genre, and they both make a lot of very interesting points. That's all I have to say about Gunpoint and the stealth genre for today. If you've played Gunpoint, what aspects of stealth do you think it does right? In what areas would you have liked to see more improvement? What stealth games, popular or lesser known, do you think do stealth really well? Make sure you leave a comment, and if you like what you saw, please subscribe.